Hi, I'm Cole Wilson, and I'm a screen actor. Today, I'm being joined by Kevin Inouye, an associate professor at Case Western Reserve University, who is an armorer, a gun wrangler, and just all around very knowledgeable individual about weapons, stunt work. He's a stunt performer himself. He teaches, he obviously has a lot of knowledge on this subject. So I hope you enjoy it. If you would like to see more content like this, please like and subscribe to my channel, Diary of a Screen Actor. And please do not hesitate to get in touch with me via email. My email's down below. If you think of somebody in your network who you think would be a really great candidate to interview, be it about something backstage, be it something acting related, directing, writing, really anything that is industry related, I would love to bring somebody on to discuss and educate our community. So thank you in advance for thinking about that. Okay, welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've got Kevin Inouye with us.
Thank you. Glad to join you.
So Kevin, I found Kevin when I went looking for stage combat in my area. I just Googled stage combat classes, some martial arts, some weapons, and I found Kevin. So Kevin, maybe you could introduce yourself and let me know how you got into this industry.
Sure. So currently I am, my primary job is as an assistant professor of movement and acting and stage combat at Case Western Reserve University and the CWRU CPH Cleveland Playhouse MFA Acting program as well.
Cool.
But yeah, I also, as as most theater instructors do, I do work in the profession as well. And most of what I do these days is fight choreography. And so I'm a certified teacher and theatrical firearms instructor with the Society of American Fight Directors, as well as a SAG-AFTRA union stunt performer. And I run a small prop weapons business on the side, doing rentals for different theaters and movie companies. And I've also published and things like that. So, I mean, it's a mix. You know, stage combat and stunt work are not all I do, but it is my most established specialty within teaching. I mean, I'm getting older. I've got a family. I need the stability of a teaching job. I don't want to be hustling jobs all the time.
Fair enough.
So yeah, it's a mix of things. And in terms of how I got into this, I mean, I had done martial arts, I'd done fencing, I'd done theater, I'd done a little bit of dance. And when I discovered that you actually could do stage combat as a thing, it was incredibly exciting. But I wasn't able to actually take full-time classes in that, full-time, like an SAFT certification class until '98, I think it was, in DC with Brad Waller, who at the time was a SAFT instructor there.
Wow, very cool. Well, I will be linking below all of your websites, your books, everything, because you have your 2 YouTube channels as well.
Yeah, I haven't been as great about keeping up on them as you are, but
you have a lot of videos though. You have a lot of videos on both. And I actually found some other really interesting people that I'm going to interview through your channel. So that's cool. Great. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. So what martial art did you begin with? Did you begin as a child, as a teenager?
I mean, I did a little bit of Taekwondo in like 3rd grade, but I don't know that really counts. I mean, I didn't get serious about it at all until college, when I found a Bujinkan Ninpo Taijutsu class. So basically ninjutsu, which was really popular in the Midwest in the 80s and 90s largely because of Stephen Hayes, who was sort of the first Westerner to be able to study with Hatsumi Sensei in Japan and bring some of that over. And it just kind of happened to time out right with the cultural fad of obsession with ninjas, whether they're turtles or not.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And so that was where I got sort of my most solid grounding in martial arts. And I appreciated I still use a lot of that. So things like falls and rolls have been incredibly helpful in stunt work and in stage performance. And also the fact that that art included both unarmed and armed forms and a range of different types of weapons and things like that. That variety has certainly served me well as a choreographer, because there's so many different kinds of gigs you're going to get out there. You never know what's going to be useful.
Wow. I feel like there are so many areas here that I want to dive into. In terms of stage combat for theater versus stage combat for the screen, are there, I mean, there are probably major differences, but I'm not even sure what to ask. So maybe you can enlighten.
Yeah. And a lot of that is actually what prompted my more recent book on screen combat, was because I know there's a lot of folks who are getting training through the SAFD, which is the main academic and professional training organization for stage combat in this country, who are then trying to transition into film work. But the SAFD, while their mission statement says that it is also for supporting theater and film, the vast majority of what you get, especially in the certification classes, is really designed around live theater. So I would say that a lot of the concepts are the same. I mean, a stage punch and a camera punch are very similar in terms of how we cheat non-contact and have to line up the angles to make it read right to an audience, stuff like that. But they're very different in the execution and in the culture and in the standards. And in some of the cheats that are available to us. So I do think there are big differences. I don't think it's impossible to make that leap back and forth. And I know a number of folks who've been very successful in doing so, but they are different. And I think going either direction without realizing that could cause problems if you try and transition and just assume that it's the same.
Interesting. Well, I suppose you could say the same for really stage acting and screen acting as well.
Sure.
What stood out to me when in your description there was cultural differences. There's a difference in culture. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So a number of different things. I mean, on the sort of larger level of capital C culture, stunt work does tend to draw different types of people. Most people who go into stage combat, most people who perform stage combat are actors. They're not specifically stage combatants. Unless you're hired on as a supernumerary in an opera production or something like that, you're usually hired as an actor. And then it's, oh, can you do this also? Even if it's a role like, Tybalt or any of the fighting characters in She Kills Monsters, that's never the first question or the only audition, right? It's then they look at your special skills at the bottom and say, oh, you've done the class on this too? Great.
Which is why I went looking for you in the first place.
Yeah. Because, when you're doing a show, the fight is only going to be a couple minutes. And if you have a couple of fights, okay, maybe it's a little bit more, but still the vast majority of your time is not fighting.
Right.
In film work, you're much more likely to have a character who comes on, does a fight, gets killed. That's all they do, right? Film and television, that's super common. So it is its own market niche in a way that it really isn't in live theater. So the expectation in film and television is that if you have a serious fight scene, you're going to have professionals who are there just for that. They specialize in that. Whereas in theater, you kind of have to make everything work for who you get and know that they were probably hired because they can sing really well, or because they can act really well, or because they know the director really well, or who knows, right? Or they just happened to fit the dress and they needed a last minute replacement for that character. Maybe it's an understudy, who knows? But within stunts, the expectation is that you are here as a specialist for that. Now, there's room for some other things in terms of the whole like action actor thing, or background players who might come in for a battle scene and just have some repeated sequence. But really, there's not a lot of folks who are trying to make a career of that, because background pay is it's like $100 a day. A union production and no residuals, whereas stunt work pays pretty well.
Interesting.
One of the better paying jobs if you can get it.
Interesting. I know another stunt worker, Kyle Houston, who said that he's trained with you a few times, and I think he's moving away actually. But I find it so interesting, the network. The more I get into this industry, I mean, everybody knows everybody. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, and that's also a little different between stage combat and stunts. Like stage combat, everybody knows everybody because we all go to the same workshops.
Okay.
And that's changing as the organizations grow, and as there's more and more people. It's weird for me now to look at names of certified teachers and be like, I don't think I've ever met them. That never used to happen.
Wow.
But within stunt work, it is a business thing,
Hmm.
because the other thing is the stunt players are generally hired by the stunt coordinator.
Okay.
So it's different from in live theater where you might have an audition for the director or your agent might book you something. Generally, the stunt coordinator gets to bring in their own crew, or they might say, like Richard Fike, who runs Stunt Predators, Ohio Stunts here. He's got a binder of the people who are kind of in his roster who have trained with him, and so when a director comes into town, he can say, "Well, see if any of these look right. These are my people." So
Okay.
you really do have to make inroads with the coordinator to get jobs, and sometimes that gets really aggressive with people going on set and hustling complete strangers, because that was the business model. Is you go in, you try to find a time when they're between takes on another job, you hand them an envelope and say, "Here's my stuff. I know you got another job coming up. Please hire me."
Wow.
It's very different from waiting for a casting call kind of thing.
It sounds like a lot of hustling for yourself as a stunt performer.
Yeah. So the stunt business model is very different.
Hmm.
Other things that are different in that business model that lead to a cultural difference as well. For example, often when you are on a union production, you'll have your stunt base rate and any normal union bonuses in terms of if it's overtime or they skip a meal or they smoke on set or whatever. And there's often stuff. I've never not gotten overtime on a union set, I think. They
Very
always.
good.
But even on days when I didn't do anything, I was just waiting and never got called up.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, but they also usually have a pool of money for what they call stunt bumps. And that's sort of like a little extra bonus. Sometimes they're like, you know what, I need you to take this really hard hit and it's gonna suck, but I'll give you a good stunt bump. You can spend the next couple of days in a bathtub of ice and getting over it, taking some painkillers, and we'll see you in a couple of days. And because you only need the one good take, and if they
Right.
know it's something like that, they can set up multiple cameras, they can be ready.
Right.
Sometimes that's what it is. And so if you've got to do, an unpadded stair fall or a nasty car hit or just get clotheslined by a really big guy or something like that, they might say, okay, give it what you got. We want one really good take so you don't have to get up and do it again. And then just know that we'll take care of you. Right. And so there's a somewhat mercenary culture that comes out of that sometimes of, I want to have the gnarliest looking hit I can. I want to find new painful looking ways to hit the ground because I want to impress the coordinator and get a stunt bump.
Wow.
I want them to look at the monitor and be like, oh, that looked wicked. Here, let's make sure you get a stunt bump for that.
Oh my gosh. Well, from watching your videos, I've watched a number of videos on each of your individual channels, and I was mesmerized by the one where the girl was suited up to burn.
Yeah.
And she's like moving and she's on fire, and it's it occurred to me like, this isn't your average wannabe actor who goes to do stunt work. There's some grit involved here. There's a little bit of
it's training. That's really training more than like if a burn goes well, it's uncomfortable, but it's not painful. I was part of a group when I was in Seattle that did stunt burn. It's the Hellbenders stunt team with some very talented people who also taught for the USA Stunt School there, which is a stunt training program in the Northwest. It's been going on for ages. Wow. As opposed to something like a hard fall where someone flips you and you hit the pavement. For stage, if I'm gonna fall, a good stage fall doesn't hurt.
Okay, and I would also mention that on a stage fall would be quite a bit louder as well. No, like I don't know.
It depends on the context. But if a stage fall, if you do it right, it doesn't hurt, and you get back up and you sing your song, or you exit for the next scene and swap costumes and come back on as a different soldier and die again, or whatever it is, right? A good stunt fall, if it doesn't hurt at all, you're probably being lazy. Is kind of, again, that cultural difference. The ideal for a stunt fall is, oh yeah, that kind of hurts, but 5-10 minutes later, you're like, you know what? No, I'm good. Let's do another. It's that difference between pain and damage. You don't want to damage anything. You don't want to injure yourself, right? You still want to be smart. Nobody wants to be injured. You can't work. You can't do these things we enjoy doing anymore. But pain is different from injury.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. And is part of that because the camera catches so much, the camera sees all?
Yeah. Some of it is just audience expectation. because there's a little more audience suspension of disbelief in live theater. They know that you're there doing it for them. And if it looks super painful, they're going to get pulled out of the story because they're worried about the actor
Right.
and not the character, right? If I see what looks like a super painful fall in live theater, I'm gonna start wondering, like, are they okay? Or, how did they do that? Or other things that take me out of the story. Whereas when I'm watching a movie, it might look really painful, but I know that even if someone did get hurt, that was a year and a half ago, probably, or more. And so there's nothing I can do about it now. I don't feel as complicit in that of just sitting and watching it and being, enjoying it. And B, I also know that they have other ways of dealing with it. So one of them is that, there might be mats or pads that we can't see. In live theater, I can't slide a mat out, fall into it, slide the mat away again, and like tell the audience just not to look down and see it. But I can tell the camera not to pan down when I do a fall so that they don't see that extra couple inches of mat. Or these days they can CG the mat out again later.
Oh, wow.
I can stop camera for a little while, put on what they call a gator back, which is like rigid spine protection, and then get something broken over my back, and then stop and take it back off again and do the rest of the scene. If we can justify a camera cut there, that's fine. But in live theater, I'd have to wear it for the whole scene and they'd see it, right? And I wouldn't get away with that. So there are other cheats available. We can swap out props for breakaways or for rubber props back and forth between full-bladed and FX props and rubber props.
Rubber crops?
Yeah. So if here, hang on, I'll be right back.
You bring toys?
I can. Well, I'm in my basement where everything is anyway.
Excellent.
So, I mean, if I'm doing a rumble in an alley somewhere, and there's a construction site and there's bits of rebar lying around, in live theater, it would have to sound right when I dropped it. So it'd be really hard to just pick up something and like throw a piece of rebar at somebody and not have it either look really fake and sound really fake or be really dangerous, right? But in films, we Foley everything anyway. The sounds are always added in post. So it makes it much easier to use rubber props. This is from New Rule Effects.
Wow, it's so real.
Rubber props, right? And you can, if you've got a professional props department, they can cast copies of whatever your hero props are.
Oh, cool.
So if I were working on a movie, I'd probably have a real piece and a fake piece and possibly a cut off piece if I needed to like stab someone with it. And then they could kind of CG in a little bit as it goes in, and then I can, you don't need to do retractable props anymore. They're not reliable or super safe, and CG can do it better now anyway.
How cool.
So there's different cheats available to us in film that we don't have as much in live theater. Live theater, it matters what the sounds of the swords are when they hit each other. In movies, it doesn't. So, movies were the first to start using aluminum more instead of steel, and now actually transferring more into bamboo instead of aluminum because it's even lighter. That's a trick we picked up from Asian martial arts movies, which came originally from like Chinese opera.
Wow.
Laminated bamboo blades. They're super light and they're fairly cheap to produce.
Well, and think of every take you have to do again and again and again, different angles. How I wonder about that sometimes. I've been watching The Witcher, and his sword looks kind of heavy, and I wonder sometimes about how many times he had to carry that and swing that, and I just wonder about the arm.
This is where mime comes into it as well, though, is because probably the sword actually isn't that heavy in most of those shots. For something like The Witcher, you'll have different versions. You'll have what's called your hero prop, which is an actual steel sword, and may or may not even be sharp if we need to see it like cut something in a scene. If I'm doing a scene in a kitchen and I have a kitchen knife, I'm going to want a sharp version so that we can establish, look, it's a sharp knife. When the scene opens and I'm cutting tomatoes and we see, oh, that's a really sharp knife. Yeah. Right. And then we see the person come in over my shoulder. We cut to a different angle, take the sharp knife away, and if the actor is someone we don't trust with a sharp knife, that might have been an insert of someone else's hands doing the cutting for all we know.
Right, yeah.
Take the sharp knife away, give them maybe a blunt aluminum knife or a plastic knife for the fight scene, and then a cut off partial knife where they stab them, right? And then another like rubber knife where they throw it, and we do a whip pan, and then the other one's already like broken off and sticking into the person already. These ways of using editing and prop swaps to make it safer. But if I've got a cut off sword or a rubber sword, it's not going to be heavy. Or rubber guns is another one you see a lot. And if I'm waving them around like they're weighing nothing, because they aren't, they're foam, it's a bit of a giveaway. So this is part of my concern when I hear things like with the fallout from the Rust accident.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah. So when I hear production companies saying we're not going to use any more real guns, we're just going to use rubber guns. I mean, that's great from a safety perspective, but the challenge is that a lot of actors just can't sell the reality of that. They don't know how to endow that with a certain amount of weight or danger. They can't stop going pew, pew, pew or bang, bang every time they're supposed to fire it because it doesn't doing anything. So they feel like they need to do something. So just the difference between a foam rubber rifle and a metal replica rifle can add a lot to a production. Now, there's a lot of things in between real and foam rubber, but
yeah, I would imagine the weight of it, the feel of it. Wow, so many things. Well, do we want to talk about weapons? I wanted to ask you about how somebody would get into stunt work. Maybe let's finish off talking about stunts, and then
sure.
I'm curious, you mentioned the stunt predators who you're with Rick Fike. For someone looking to get into stunt work, I mean, where would they begin? I've read about stunt driving. You're talking about all these props and weapons and martial arts. Where, for somebody looking to do stunts, could it maybe burns, whatever it be, or maybe something I don't even know about, what would you recommend?
There's a bit of a catch-22 because a lot of it happens with these somewhat enclosed groups that you sort of need a referral or a recommendation or something to get into. You can't just walk up and knock on Rich's door and be like, hey, I want to be a part of the group. And so you need something to bring to the table before that. And so this is another one of those sort of differences between stunts and stage combat. Most stage combat people come into it through acting or theater school one way or another. Whereas most stunt people come into it through having done maybe martial arts, maybe motorcycles or gymnastics, firearms work. There's stuff that you end up doing in stunts, whether it's, precision driving or, high falls, diving and underwater work, and having certification with that. Scuba certification is useful if you want to go into stunt work. Just within Rich's group, I know that we've got a couple of former pro wrestlers. We've got at least one guy who is an insanely good motorcycle racer and can do a lot of good motorcycle trick stuff. We've got a number of folks who came into it through various different martial arts. Rick runs a dojo, so that's one place where he pulls from is the students he trains there. But that's not everybody. There's some folks who are former military or police, and that's also something that you can kind of sell as a skill set, because they know that when they cast somebody who has that background as a character who is a military or police character, they don't have to worry about them knowing, like, how do I wear this? How do I clip on this strap? If they want some random radio chatter, they know what to do. They know what things are called. So that kind of stuff can also be an in.
Okay. So basically, if somebody watching is interested in getting into stunts, maybe assess what they already know and assess maybe areas of interest that they might like to try. If they are into diving or scuba, they could maybe take some classes, see what that might be like, if they would like that. And then, I'm a big fan of using your network for reaching out blindly to people and say, you know what, somebody who, I find lots of interesting people that way. So okay. So basically just getting started in an area, doing some research and finding some group like the Stunt Predators maybe, and seeing, you could always ask, I suppose, and say, like, this is where I'm at right now. These are the things that I'm doing. What would you need to see from me for me to join you, or for me to have success, right? Was that something that you would recommend? So
there are some stunt schools within the US. They tend to not be a great place to just get hired. It's not like, oh, I need a stunt certification and then I can go get a job. It's not that sort of a system. It's not like being a welder or something. Okay. But what the stunt school does is it gives you, and this is the USA Stunt School based in Seattle. They give you sort of a wide range of things. You get to do a little bit of wire work, you get to do a body burn, you get to do some medium high falls, some precision driving, some fighting stuff. But it also does give you connections because they bring in instructors for each of those topics, and they have a network of alumni. So that can be one place to start.
Okay.
But I would argue if you don't have anything yet that is a relevant skill set, be that martial arts or gymnastics or precision driving or anything like that. If you don't have anything like that yet, I would question why you think you want to be a stunt performer.
Yeah.
And if you know what you're getting into.
Try diving or try driving or try martial arts, I suppose.
Because you might think it sounds cool, but if you haven't done anything at all like that yet, I'm not sure you're ready to dive in yet.
That makes sense. Well, you said so many people are actors. Maybe take some acting classes. I love where I train, and I hear from everybody who's a working actor that training with working actors is huge. So maybe start by doing some stunt related things to see if you even like that, and also maybe trying the acting, right?
Yep.
Because I suppose there are those who probably think maybe I could be a stunt person, but they haven't even tried acting yet. Maybe try both. If they're going to be background on a set, see what that looks like.
Yeah, see what a movie set looks like, definitely. Acting skills are always useful. I will say there's sometimes a bit of a bias about like, oh, you're not really a stunt person, you're an actor. You need to choose which one, sort of thing. I have seen that from some people of they have a harder time taking someone seriously as a stunt performer if they look and see more acting on their resume than stunt stuff.
I don't know. Seems to me that if you have any experience in either one, that's going to help somebody more than having nothing.
It is much more specialized. So this is another difference between film and live theater. Live theater, they often need that triple threat, quadruple threat, whatever, that person who can do circus tricks and sing and dance and act and maybe also, do a high fall. But for film, they're going to hire a different person for each of those. So even if you are like a stunt double, like a friend of mine who I met through stage combat workshops that also did some film stuff, went out to LA. He was, for example, one of Drax's stunt doubles in the Avengers stuff. But I say one of because there were, I think, at least 3, maybe 4, something like that, depending on what skill set was needed. If they needed someone who could do gymnastics and fight stuff, if they needed someone who could specialize in wire work, often if there's a separate driving double for someone, if they need motorcycle or car work.
What is wire work exactly?
Specialized. So wire work would be like if you think of like the Matrix movies where people are flying through the air and doing flips or running along the walls, stuff like that. What they do is they put you in a harness.
Sorry, speaking of things flying, like I'm looking out the window, this big like sheet or like massive piece of plastic just went like this. As you're talking about things flying through the air, I'm like, oh, whoa, what was that? I'm sorry. So people through the air spinning.
Yeah, so depending on what the effect is, they'll put you in some sort of a harness and they'll wire you up. And so this is where you also need qualified riggers because you have to trust them with your life. Because it could be anything from a 2-point harness where you're doing a flip and you need to know as a performer how to shift your weight so that you'll pivot and be able to land and look like you're in control and not like you're just at the end of a string that a bunch of people are yanking on and just going wherever. And that's a skill set. If you look at the first Matrix movie, when Keanu Reeves has the dojo fight and he runs up the wall in slow motion and does that slow motion backflip, if you watch his hands, you see him doing this in the middle of that flip, and it's because he's pushing on his wires because he doesn't know how to adjust his balance yet. And they digitally erased the wires later, but if you know how those harnesses work, you can totally tell, oh, he's cheating. He's pushing his way over. It's like a mountain climber hanging onto their rope. You're not supposed to do that.
So is there a way I suppose there's a way to practice with that weight if he were given the opportunity to do that, that is.
Yeah, I mean, ideally you get just time in a harness, but some of those skills can also be learned or practiced, for example, on a trampoline. Trampoline work can be a good way to practice manipulating your body in the air and turning over.
What about aerial silks?
Yeah, I haven't gotten to do those. Those are, it's a very different aesthetic, but I'm sure it doesn't hurt in terms of just learning how to control your balance in your body in space. And then there are times when it's not supposed to look pretty, where they might just put you on a hydraulic system that's going to just jerk you in the air. Like if there's an explosion and people go flying, sometimes that's an air ram, which is like a vault kind of thing with a hydraulic underneath it that'll launch with however many pounds of pressure. They have to dial it in right. and send you flying. Sometimes it's a mini tramp and you just kind of jump off of it. And sometimes it's a wire hooked up to something that'll jerk you back and send you flying through the air.
Wow. This is all very exciting.
Yeah, and it's cool stuff, but it is also, there's a huge element of trust. Because when you're getting hooked up to something that's going to put, 300-pound jerk at the end of that rope, you need to know that you can control your body well enough not to land on your head, but also trust the other people not to think it would be funny to dial it up an extra 60 pounds and see what happens, or, to not think about things that might be bouncing and then, smack you into a pole somewhere. There's a lot of trust. And so this is part of why those stunt communities tend to be a little insular, is because you really do have to trust them with your life. Whereas stage combat, we meet people, we do a job for 4 weeks, we say goodbye, we go on, we do another job. And we know that they're not hired to be a specialist in that. So there's a little less element of trust, and with that, a little less pushing of the envelope for safety, because I don't know if that actor necessarily is going to know how to stop that sword in time. I might need to really be able to defend myself.
Interesting. So in terms of swords and things, I've looked into fencing a little bit. I watch things like Lord of the Rings and The Witcher and numerous other things that have actors using swords, and thinking about, okay, if I were to add to my special skills, which I'm always looking to do, what would be most useful for me? And I was curious as well, for different people, different looks, different genders, different ages, everything, what would you recommend learning something based on type? Like, would I look like I know Taekwondo, or would I look like I would be an elf in the forest with a sword or something? I don't know. Like, what would you recommend? I want to, because you can't do everything at once, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder for watchers, viewers, everybody looks different. Everybody has amazing things to bring to the table. Should they dial it in on look? Like, what do you think?
I think to some degree, that may play a factor in stunt work, less so in live theater, but in stunt work, if you look Asian and you can't do any Asian martial arts, people are going to be a little surprised as a stunt performer. That's one of the things they're going to expect from someone who looks Asian, just because Asian martial arts were so ubiquitous, even in the United States. But on the other hand, there's a danger in trying to chase the next big thing, because there's trends, there's fads. For a while, everybody was doing Kung Fu and wire work. For a while, everybody was doing parkour or MMA, or, it's whatever is trendy right now. Tricking became huge with like the Marvel movies and all. That's where you'd got all the gratuitous spins and flips and gymnastics kind of worked into it, and trying to justify it somehow in the fight. So like what Captain America does, for example, or Spider-Man. And it's half gymnastics, half martial arts. So, if you wanted to try and aim for something like that, like, okay, I'm going to do some capoeira and some wushu, so I get some of that flippy, spinny stuff that seems so popular. But the trends come and go. Sometimes it just becomes taken for granted that, oh yeah, everybody knows parkour now, so that's not a special thing anymore. And sometimes it's just people get sick of it. So, I think, for example, the sort of Mexican wrestling moves that we associate with Black Widow, or a lot of the other sort of heroines of the 90s, where it was always about leg locks and going up and doing a leg scissors of the head and then a little flippy thing, and you make them fall over and then you pose on the ground. It's become a trope. So while it has its place, I think it's also going to be more and more phased out as people say, okay, what else you got?
Until it's been long enough, and then it's again.
And then people will be like, oh yeah, that stuff, that was so much fun, right? And that's something that started with Mexican wrestlers. And if we were going with body type 25 years ago, I'm not sure if I would have said, yeah, Scarlett Johansson, I would cast you as a big beefy male Mexican wrestler, so you should learn that style of wrestling, fighting. It's hard to say sometimes what's going to take off.
That makes sense. I guess go back to what seems interesting, what seems fun, try it, see if you like it, and dial it from there.
Yeah, I mean, find what works for you, and then find the market where that works. I think that's going to be much more important than trying to chase the next trend or be the next whatever. I mean, look at Jackie Chan. Like he completely failed when he was trying to be the next Bruce Lee, because that just wasn't who he was, and it didn't work.
So interesting.
Yeah, and in terms of styles, I honestly think the instructor is more important than the style most of the time, because any martial style, any sport like gymnastics or parkour or anything like that, you can find good instructors and you can find bad instructors. And so finding a good instructor is, I think, more important than finding a good style.
Okay. And I suppose using our network and reaching out and finding who would somebody recommend, who's somebody that we would trust to recommend somebody great. And then of course, just biting the bullet and trying it.
And some of it's fit, a lot of martial arts classes, for example, they'll say, you can try out one class free and then we'll talk, or, first week free. And then if you want to continue lessons, then we'll sign a contract and give us a check or whatever. And so, when I moved to Cleveland, for example, I checked out a couple of different classes. And so I'm watching for a couple of things. First of all, does the instructor seem to know what they're doing? Do I get that sense of presence and vibe from them that tells me, okay, yeah, they know how this works. They're not just going through motions. I also really want to watch the senior students, and like, are the students picking it up? Or is it just, maybe the instructor is really good at doing it, but not good at teaching it.
Right.
Do they get good students? And then also just the vibe of the class in terms of if it's a fit for you or not. I've been to classes where they throw people into sparring day one, and it's all about like, oh, just get that go-get 'em attitude, and aggression is 9/10 of the battle, and it's like, that's not what I'm after. But some people love that,
Yeah. I mean, if there were one, and maybe you can't answer this, maybe I don't know. Is there one martial art that you would recommend for as a gateway, as a gateway martial art, maybe, or what you deem to be, I guess, something that would flow into other things, be it sword stuff or be it tumbling, I don't know, falls.
I would say, to me, one of the priorities is something with grappling, because that's going to teach you how to fall down. It's going to teach you how to physically listen to what your partner is doing, to their balance, where they are, which really helps both in stage combat and stunt work, in terms of being able to dial it in with your partner. To know, oh, they're a little off balance. I can either choose to take them more off balance, or I can kind of let them recover and give them my balance so they can do something to me so that they look good, which is what they're supposed to do in that moment.
Right.
So that kind of sensitivity and physical listening, I think, is a really good skill to have, as well as hitting the ground. And it's also fairly universal. Every style has some sort of grappling. One of the big differences in swordplay, for example, between what was happening when Bob Anderson was choreographing The Princess Bride and what's happening in more recent stuff, is that in his day, in Bob Anderson's day, all of the main fight choreographers came from the world of fencing. Okay. And so all of the swordplay, whether it was Robin Hood with broadswords or Scaramouche or whatever, it all kind of looked like Olympic style fencing, because that was the background that a lot of them had. Now we're moving away from that. And a lot of our swordplay these days is actually informed by more historical sources. We have had this huge resurgence in the understanding and documentation of medieval and Renaissance swordplay. Manuals that have been found and translated and interpreted and published, so that this is now its own sport. And one of the big differences is that you have grappling, that not only can I cut you or try to cut you and you can parry, but I can cut you, you can try and parry, and then you can bind down and come in and like give an arm bar to me with your sword. And all of this stuff can flow seamlessly, because this is the difference between a fight and a fencing match, right? Is the rules. Rules change the game. So in modern fencing, the blades are so whippy in something like foil, you can bend it around and tap somebody on the back and score a point. And you have to have right of way. So if I didn't extend my arm first, the point doesn't count. There's things like that make it very different from a fight.
I can't imagine street fighting being that way.
Yeah. Well, and there were reasons they did it. They wanted to teach people to defend first. so they didn't have as many double kills with stupid young men going off and having duels.
Imagine
And so
that.
that's why you have to either have right of way or defend against the oncoming attack before you can riposte and get that point. Right. So it was an intentional choice, but it is also different from a fight. Every martial art will have compromises because you can't practice to really break and kill people without compromising something. Either you go slow, or you go predictably, or you pad up, or you do solo forms, or there's all these different ways you can try to adjust, but you're going to have to adjust something. Something's got to give. And that's going to change how the style goes. So that's another thing to look at if you're looking at martial arts is this a sparring kind of system? Is this a solo form kind of system? Is this a historical interpretation kind of system where we're trying to learn it the way that they did in, Edo period Japan or in 16th century Italy, because it's a historical artifact, or are they trying to learn it as like modern self-defense? But all of them are going to eventually involve grappling if it's a fight. John Wick, that was one of the big revelations there is, guns, it's harder to make them interesting because theoretically all you have to do is that, and the story's over. So how do we make interesting actor struggles where both people are in frame and not in two separate shots or a super wide shot? One of the answer is, get into grappling and disarms and retention and that kind of stuff. And so the introduction of judo to the combination of judo and the firearms training he had was what made John Wick so successful.
It's so interesting. There's so much that goes into it that the viewer doesn't realize. The great illusion. I love it. I do want to talk about weapons, especially guns. And you're an armorer. Would you mind telling us what an armorer is?
Sure. Yeah, and there's different titles people use. Sometimes I've been called a gun wrangler. Sometimes armorer. I had at least one director who's just called me weapons. He'd be like, "Yo, weps." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, hi." Whatever it is. But basically, there needs to be somebody who's in charge of making sure that that the characters have what they need, the actors have what they need, and don't have what they don't need, and that they know how to use them. So if I'm using a firearm on a set, I was working on a BIPOC-led police drama thing a year and a half ago here in Cleveland. It's the last screen project I worked on here, thanks to COVID. And this was in the first year of COVID.
Okay.
And so for that, we were not using blanks, in part because we didn't have a soundstage. We were, using a residence where our businesses and residences were next door. You don't want to be firing off a lot of loud blanks on a busy street, things like that. If you don't have full permits, right? As well as safety issues. So we were using primarily gas blowback airsoft props, which is one of the great compromises that you can have for a prop that will do something, but not be as dangerous. So with those, the slide will cycle with every shot, but it won't, there's no explosion. And as long as you don't allow it to be loaded with any projectiles, there's nothing coming out the barrel except gas. But in order for it to come across correctly, I was in charge of choosing what character might use what. So I'd give the director some options. And it might depend on, do they have to conceal it? Is it a police character, a civilian character? Do we want something that's flashy or more old school or more practical or expensive or cheap? Or, what is the aesthetic we're going for here? Does it have to match anybody? Do I need to have a rubber double of it in stock or not? Training the performers how to hold them so that they know what they're doing. There's a couple of dead giveaways in terms of like, oh, that actor does not know what they're doing with that firearm. And the rules are a little different than with real firearms training because we have to break some of those real firearm safety rules to be able to tell our stories.
Right.
These are stories about characters doing unsafe things.
Right.
We can't look like we're at a shooting range at an NRA pistol certification class when we're doing that.
Fair enough.
So making sure that I know, what are you actually going to do in this shot? And are you prepared to do that? Do we need to see it fire? Do we not? Do we need to see you loading it or unloading it in this shot, in this insert shot? And give them the safest prop option for that shot, the safest thing that'll get the job done. So, for example, with Rust, one of the issues was that they had a fully functional and a loaded prop for a camera rehearsal for a shot that wasn't supposed to go off anyway. So that's part of the issue. And part of the reason probably was the armorer wasn't there handing it to them. So the armorer, the gun wrangler, should be handing the prop to the actor before they need to use it, saying, here's what this is, here's how it works, here's what you're going to do in this shot, here's where it's dangerous or not, moving parts, all that stuff, making sure that they know that before you give them possession of it. And as soon as they're done, you take it back, because you don't want to leave a bored actor sitting around with a dangerous prop. John-Erik Hexum, do you know that name?
Mm-mm.
He was a beefcake model turning actor in the 80s who was the famous accident before Brandon Lee. Basically, he was like tied to a bed in some scene with a .44 Magnum with blanks, and they had to move the lights, and he was bored and decided to play Russian roulette with it. And boom, blew a chunk of his skull into his brain and died.
Oh my gosh.
So that kind of thing is why, as soon as they no longer need it, you want to be in there, say, thank you, I'll take that. Let me know when you need it again. And checking in, like, were there any jams, misfires, any issues, any of that kind of stuff.
Amazing.
So
well,
really,
historical weapons, right? I mean, there's so many projects that have muskets and things that historically were not so reliable, right?
Yeah. The movie I got my SAG card on has never come out. I finally saw a trailer this last year. It might come out, but it was set in the 1700s, and we had matchlocks. And there was a group of reenactors they brought in who had a lot of that gear, which is a brilliant move anytime you have a period piece. Lincoln made heavy use of them with the cavalry that I ride with, because they know what they're doing, and half the time they have their own gear. But they also had a bunch of special skills background people in on that. And there was one battle scene where one of the background players had a matchlock, ran out in the front of this line. We had like 200 actors and horses and smoke machines and everything going. And his matchlock didn't go off. And he turned and like found the armor and was like,
and it went off.
Completely broke character. It didn't go off, but he ruined the shot. He completely ruined the shot, because one of the things they need to know is, what do I do if it goes wrong?
Right.
Because matchlocks often misfired anyway, and because his character was a nobody, he was just background, it wouldn't have mattered if he had just had some way to stay there and look and safely, like in character, look like, it's not going off, what do I do? Or how to like, just pretend you get shot, lie down dead, keep it pointed in a safe direction until you hear cut, and then you come up and do the like, hey, armor, I need a hand.
Yeah, fair enough.
So you need a plan B, because you don't want actors just improvising with a weapon in their hands. There are times when you could get a hang fire. Matchlocks do that a lot. You get like a little sizzle, 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 and then a bang instead of a quick bang. So yes, obviously you need to keep it pointed in a safe direction if that's something that can happen.
And the actor needs to know what to do, or know that that's a possibility.
Yes.
Or what to do in that instance.
Yes.
On the scene. That's so interesting. There's so much into it.
And you can't just unload a muzzle loader. You can't just take the powder out. There's no way to unload a muzzle loader other than to fire it, or conceivably there's ways you can like screw a ball out if it's jammed. But when we're loading them with blanks, there's gunpowder and there's some sort of a wadding to hold the powder in. But you can't just like dump it out. So to unload them, usually they just fire them. There's actually a line in Merry Wives of Windsor, the Shakespeare play, where Falstaff is talking about, well, maybe I'll hide from your husband in the chimney. And the woman says, no, don't do that. That's where they empty their fowling pieces when they come back from hunting, because they couldn't unload them. So they just fire them up the chimney.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, and I actually wanted to ask what, in your opinion, the value of a weapon is. I mean, thinking about the principle of Chekhov's gun, for example, if a gun's introduced in the beginning, it has to be fired at some point. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, right?
I think that's a little dated, and it depends on the genre. So if I were to try to apply that,
but still,
if I were to try to apply that to a police procedural, it would mean that every single officer on the force had to fire his gun in that shot, his or her gun, and that's not going to happen, right? So it depends on what we're talking about here. In live theater, firearms mean a lot more because they're more rare, because there's always concern over how loud is this going to be? Is this safe? How fake is it going to be? Like, they're just a lot more problematic in live theater.
Believe it.
In film, it's a little bit different. So I think the Chekhov's gun idea might still apply to most live theater. But it's really a genre choice, and I think especially in America, we're so used to the mundane aspect of firearms being a part of everyday life that, you know, if you're doing a modern Coriolanus on stage, they're all soldiers, they're all going to have guns.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to check out and make sure, like, okay, did every single gun get fired at some point? No, they're
No doubt.
soldiers, they have guns, we just take that for granted.
But symbolically for certain characters.
It needs to tell us something. It needs to be there for a reason, right? So the choice of weapon will also tell us something, right?
And that's your choice. You get to weigh in on that based on who the
I get to
character
weigh
is.
in. I can make recommendations. So often when someone wants to rent some swords, you know, we'll have a discussion back and forth about, well, what kind of a look do you want? How heavy do you want it to be? How long or short do you want it to be? There was a She Kills Monsters recently where we had a fascinating discussion about what could be used in a wheelchair effectively. But you know, so some of it is, does this look like something that they have used a lot and know how to use? Or is it, you know, sometimes the whole point is that they don't, right?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
And that also teaches us something about it. You know, is it there to escalate the situation so that when that is drawn, we know that the stakes are raised, because that's something directors love to do, is raise the stakes.
Yep.
And sometimes we need more things they can do, like, oh, we need a hammer we can cock back just to show, no, really, we really mean it. You know, all these little actions that people need to do, the business. Sometimes that's what they're there for, but sometimes it's not. You know, sometimes it's comedic slapstick, and that's all it's meant to be. Or it's, you know, it's dark humor. It's a Martin McDonough kind of thing, you know, Lieutenant of Inishmore. Yeah, we need to know that these are sort of ostensibly dangerous characters and other characters have a reason to fear them, but we may or may not take it seriously as an audience, depending on the genre and the presentation and, you know, how it's treated by everybody else.
Interesting. There's so much to it. There's so much more that goes into the creation of a finished project that then viewers see. They just, you know,
it's designed.
Chinks in the armor when something doesn't go quite right, but when everything is flawless, I think a lot of people don't even realize. That's the magic of it. So for anybody looking to add some kind of firearms training or something, like I would love to get some kind of training that would help me maybe win a role. If it's between me and somebody else, maybe we look quite similar, our acting ability is similar, but the role requires some weapon, something.
Right.
What would what would I need to pursue training wise or certification wise to accurately be able to put that on my resume under special skills as an actor? And when they're like, oh, so when you like, what's your experience with this? I can say, oh, I've done training in this and this and this.
Right.
What do I need to do?
I mean, there are options. So the Society of American Fight Directors has it's usually done as a 2-day intensive theatrical firearms safety course.
Okay.
And note that it's not a proficiency course or a performance course, it's a safety course. And so it is geared just as much for the backstage crew at a play involving firearms as it is for the performers.
Okay.
And it's primarily aimed around use of blank firing props on stage, if we're being honest. And so that will address some very specific aspects of it, and you will get a chance to act out a little scene at the end, as well as have a written test and other things like that. But depending on who's teaching it and what their agenda is, it may or may not involve actually looking like you know what you're doing with it. Because there's a difference between being safe and looking like you mean business and like you have training. And the SAFT course is really aimed primarily at just making sure you're safe. Because not every character knows what they're doing either.
Right.
If you want basic firearms experience and you have nowhere else to start, there are NRA safety courses in pistol and other things available at local ranges. There's, depending on the state you're in, there are concealed carry classes that may or may not be required for you to get a concealed carry permit. And those will usually cover, you know, half of what they cover is the law and safe storage and things like that. But, you know, you will also go fire, I think, a minimum of like 6 shots at a range or something like that. So you'll have that actor sense memory of what it's like to fire a real gun within the controlled context of a shooting range, which is different from combat or competitive shooting. So a lot of this just depends on how serious you want to be about it and what kind of look you're going for. I mean, if you want to portray a police officer or detective, something like that NRA pistol class is probably not a bad choice, because that's probably not too different from the basics that officers are given. There's other things that they'll get in terms of how to wear it and retain it if someone's trying to grab your gun and stuff like that, that they won't go into in an NRA basic class. But there's tons of training out there in this country if you want it. It's possible to spend a lot of money and a lot of time if you want to on firearms training. There's really no limit to how much you could spend on that if you want to. So as with everything else, it's priorities. It's time and money, and where are you gonna invest it. The biggest things I would say are stance and grip, and to some degree the basic manipulation of things like doing a reload. Okay. And honestly, I can teach most actors that in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of building habits, I might have to remind them for a while, but it's not rocket science. It's just stuff that you might not have thought of in terms of, oh, it's not the cup and saucer grip that, you know, works fine at a shooting range, but does nothing for mitigating recoil or weapons retention or anything like that. You know, there's things like that, or you know, where your index finger is when it's not on the trigger. Stuff like that is kind of a tell, but that's an easy fix. So even just taking like an hour to learn, like, okay, how do I hold it? What do the buttons do? How do I hold it? That will be enough that if you get the chance to audition for someone and they hand you a rubber gun and you hold it correctly, they'll be like, oh, have you had some training? And then you can have a conversation. Right.
Excellent. That's really, really helpful. And then in terms of like what you would even write on the resume, and like, what do you,
be honest,
just say like NRA concealed carry?
Yeah, just be honest about what it is.
Whatever.
So, you know, with the NRA stuff, they have a whole system of, you know, NRA level 1 handgun.
Okay, like so they've got good titles then.
Or Ohio State concealed carry course, or SAFD, Theatrical Firearms Safety. And then we have a little certificate of completion from that, if anybody asks.
Okay. And so you teach at Case, but
yeah,
I think you told me in an email that you don't have workshops right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're not even doing classes in person for the first couple of weeks of the semester. So there's nothing public that is happening at the moment. Most places, that's just kind of the nature of things. A lot of the regional workshops that would normally be happening around pockets of SAFD activity have been canceled, or some of them have been moved online. There was more of that last year. I think this year, a lot of us were hoping to be back in person. Okay. And it sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. But you can also check the SAFD website, and they should have a fairly decent list of their officially sponsored regional workshops that are coming up.
Good to know. Wow, well, very good. Let's see, do I have anything else specifically? I feel like we've covered a lot of the things that I had written down I wanted to speak about. Is there anything else about combat, about weapons, about stunt work that you think would be useful to share with the community? People who are maybe getting started, actors, or have we basically covered it?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just to look out for your own safety and your partner's safety at all times, right? That you never want to get pressured into feeling like you have to do something that feels unsafe. And this should be codified in any system that you do, and certainly within, you know, SAG-AFTRA or IATSE if you're on the tech end of things, or AEA if you're a stage actor. You have the right to say, hang on, you just handed me a prop gun and told me to pull the trigger. I need to know how this is going to keep me and my scene partner safe. Can you show me how this works and what it does? You always have the right to do that.
Making sure to advocate for safety.
Yeah. And there's usually a better way. Always start with the safest option. So if they're like, oh, it's just a slap, just slap them. Like, no, you know, like you can rupture eardrums, you can do all sorts of bad things. And if nothing else, one bad hit and the rest of the run, you're going to be really tentative and it's going to look bad anyway. Yeah. So, you know, always start with saying, hey, can we find a safe way to do this? And if we need to, can we bring in a professional to show us how?
Yeah, amazing. Well, and I guess, is there one other question I had? We spoke about rubber guns after what happened in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Do you envision any other things changing potentially based on the recent occurrence?
I don't know. I mean, there is no reason technologically why we couldn't build very accurate and very safe prop replicas for any weapon that would look great and give the actors plenty to do. The problem is that there are plenty of financial reasons why nobody has done that yet.
Okay.
And so while there are purpose-made blank guns available, for example, that cannot chamber live ammunition, they're available in limited models. They tend to be much less reliable and much less well made. And they have limitations. Like the blank revolvers, you can't, if you look at it up close on camera, you can tell from the front of the cylinder that it's not a real revolver and it's not loaded. This is why they had dummy rounds in it in the first place, is with a revolver, you can see in the front of the cylinder if there's bullets sticking out the front. And so that's why dummy rounds with revolvers are so commonly used, and why a lot of the accidents, including Brandon Lee's death and the Rust accident, have involved revolvers. So there's things that real firearms are currently much more reliable for. If you want to do something with a shotgun, there's no blank firing shotguns out there. Nobody makes any. It's not that they couldn't, it's just that they haven't. And a real pump shotgun will work just fine with blanks. And so in movies, that's become common practice, is just to use the real shotgun. Or if you need another semi-automatic, they can be modified with restrictor so that they can cycle ammunition and work just fine with blanks if you have the right protocols in place. And so to my mind, the biggest problem with Rust was that they completely threw the protocols out the window. I don't know why. I don't know what they were trying to do instead. I wasn't there. But there's no reason why the armorer should have been not in the room and somebody else should have been able to grab an unsecured prop that had rounds in it, hand it to someone else, tell them it was not loaded, use it for a shot it wasn't needed for, all that stuff. There's a lot of things that had to go wrong for that accident to happen. So the biggest thing, I think, is that hopefully people will have this reminder of why the protocols are in place, why we need them, and we'll pay a little more attention instead of just being like, oh, no, this is fine. This will be fun. It's a toy. We'll just play. Now, if it also means that we get more safer options, that's great too. There's a company called Copenhagen Industries based in Copenhagen, surprise, surprise, that does guns that make a flash using propane that can be set off like right in front of your hand. They were trying to get started a few years back and couldn't get enough investors, and so they closed up the business. And then after the whole accident with Rust, they got new investors, and last I heard, they were starting up again, going to try and start marketing those.
Interesting.
So there may be market implications that will give us more options, which is great, but they're still limited. Like they still need an external propane tank and a hose connected to the prop. So there's some shots that wouldn't work for. There's only certain kinds of firearms they can do. There's no shell casings coming out or slide action, which depending on the shot may or may not matter, or could be CG'd in later, maybe not. So there's always questions of what will be best for this shot and what tools do we have. The more dangerous the tools, the more you need the protocol.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. This has been brilliant. I really appreciate you coming and speaking with me about all of this.
Sure.
It's a whole new world. It's not one that has been discussed in my realm of acting as of yet, which is why I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and share this information with people. How can people find you?
So my company is on the line at fightdesigner.com. There we are. Yep. And I've recently been redoing my personal website, which is kevininouye.com, but I think right now you still need the /WP for it to actually load correctly, because I'm still working on it. But that's also linked through Fight Designer. But the advantage of having a relatively unusual name is I'm not hard to find online. So yeah, I'm on the Case Western Reserve page. I'm on the SAFD page. I'm on Stunt listing. I'm on. It's not hard to find me.
Excellent. Well, and I hope you'll keep me in mind when you do have workshops and things again in the future. You've got my email.
All right.
I would love to take some classes, any kind of training, be it like gun related stuff, be it sword stuff, really anything. So I love to learn. So keep me posted, and I will then be able to share that with my community.
All right, will do. Thank you very much.
All right, there's Kevin. That was amazing. My mind is blown. I feel like I learned so many things and was exposed to the reality that so much thought and safety and policy goes into creating the amazing shots that we see in film and television, as well as things on stage for those who go to theater. Yeah, that was so valuable. Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. All of Kevin's links are below. And again, if you would like to see more content such as this, please do not hesitate to get in contact. Thank you so much.